In the cold world of turbulence, during the whole human history, people always searched for the tool or mediator to translate their feelings, as well as for something meaningful, the beauty, which gives hope and foundation to go on. This year, on my birthday, I found this genuine beauty in Rembrandt. Vienna, Kunsthistorisches Museum, a unique exhibition which represents quite a lot of Rembrandt's works. On one of the last days of exhibition, the 8th of January, on my 31st birthday, I visited this residence of pure art to finally see his masterpieces. Since my studying the art history at the art school as a kid, and further, the Rembrandt's name always sounded as majestic as Da Vinci or Botticelli, Raffaello, the same level of genius. And why do I love Rembrandt? To answer this question, I should first start with the love for Netherlands art. It all started with my visiting Kyiv Hanenko Museum, one of the most magic places in my city. The most significant collection of European, Asian, ancient art in Ukraine, organized by a distinguished married couple, Bogdan and Varvara, in their own mansion. Mesmerized by the beauty of interiors of Italian Renaissance masters, I finally entered the room of Flemish art and saw this, the beauty in its absolute, the winter landscape by Gijsbert Leitens, formerly known as Master of Landscapes. I stood there, hardly breathing, adoring each and every branch, the icy air, grotesque roofs. Everything looked exactly in the way I adore the most. Then I saw works of Peter Bruegel the Younger, triptych of the Temptation of Saint Anthony, the replica of Bernard van Arley, the Martyrdom of Saint Catherine, as well as copies of Rembrandt's works. And finally I realized that the Netherlands art is the love of my life. Several years after, I visited Kunsthistorisches Museum for the first time, and again I was spellbound with the collection of Peter Bruegel the Elder, peasant wedding, children's games, hunters in the snow, and of course, the Tower of Babel. Jan Bruegel's The Elders, The Adoration of the Kings, which I am absolutely in love with, the impressive collection of Rubens. After that, I became even more passionate about Flemish Dutch art. January the 8th. It's my birthday, and I'm infinitely inspired to spend my day with Rembrandt and other artists all around the world. This place is like Hogwarts for me, and it will never be enough. I bought a ticket for around 25 euros, observed the exterior of the building, which, with its sculptures, is a separate masterpiece, and finally entered the museum, feeling an absolute happiness. What is the main purpose of this exhibition for me? To compare the skillfulness of the teacher and his pupil, the way each of them evolved, to trace the influence of the great teacher, and to define what is actually the most important in art. The 17th century belongs to Dutch, a Dutch golden age. The story begins with the great teacher, the son of Miller, Rembrandt van Rijn, born in 1606 in Leiden, Dutch Republic. When he was 14 years old, he was apprenticing to several painters until he started his own workshop in Leiden at the age of 19. And 2 years later, he started to accept students. During these years, he already gained a certain popularity among nobility, and in the year 1631, at the age of 25, he moved to Amsterdam, where he successfully started a career as a portraitist and then married a cousin of his art dealer, Saskia, who came from a respected family. He became a citizen of Amsterdam and member of the local guild of painters. Unfortunately, due to a number of circumstances, personal losses and tragedies, financial hardships, he died in the grip of poverty, buried in a rented grave. Despite his inglorious end, he was not forgotten. Rembrandt left a lasting legacy. Numerous masterpieces, hundreds of works on various subjects with different styles. Among them are stunning and absolute breathtaking Bible scenes. He taught a large amount of important Dutch artists, and his influence on his students as well as next artist generations was great. And is still great. "21 years younger Van Hoogstraten, whose brilliant career as an artist began in the workshop of Rembrandt, became his pupil at 13. This is the self-portrait of an 18 years old Hoogstraten. If I met him at my 20s, I would definitely fall in love. The influence of the master, already a celebrated figure at the time, was profound. It's fascinating to trace the early stages, his attempts to surpass Rembrandt, which in time shaped him into a distinguished artist. These ambitions eventually forged him into a charismatic and driven painter. To understand how the paths of two masters are interconnected, it's important to start with the following aspect of Rembrandt's approach. When he was 33 and Hoogstraten was going to join his workshop 1 year later, Rembrandt experimented increasingly with illusionistic effects, which included barriers and thresholds such as window and door opening. The illusionistic magic of trompe-l'œil, the so-called eye deceivers, was born in the Italian Renaissance of the 15th century, and it found new life in the hands of Rembrandt. During the Quattrocento period, it was primarily used as frescoes on cathedral ceilings, and Rembrandt brought this technique down to canvas. His student, Samuel van Hoogstraten, carried this legacy further, refining the illusion, sharpening its tricks, and emerged as one of the most celebrated masters of trompe-l'œil. At the beginning, Hoogstraten imitated his famous teacher. This is a kind of illusion painting competition between them that museum visitors could observe in one room. Here you can see illusionistic portraits of Rembrandt and the emulation of his pupil. Rembrandt's Girl at the Window is a reaction to Hoogstraten's Young Girl at an Open Half Door. And these are the last illusionistic portraits by Rembrandt represented at the exhibition. And probably the kitchen maid is one of the last ones ever painted by Rembrandt. After this fantastic portrait, Hoogstraten, he would go on to develop his own style and personal approach. To me, this old man resembles the actor Daniel Defoe, and it always confused me. And now I want to return to Rembrandt's early religious paintings represented at the exhibition. Among them, there was Jeremiah lamenting on destruction of Jerusalem and Simeon's Song of Praise. The Weeping Jeremiah was completed 5 years after Rembrandt finished his apprenticeship and opened his own workshop. Just a year later, it was followed by Simeon's Song of Praise. I consider these paintings to be among his finest. They are true masterpieces, deeply moving and already bearing the marks of one of the greatest artists. We move on to the next painting, created 3 years later, St. John the Baptist preaching, with the fantastically skillful use of light. Next is Judith at the Banquet of Holofernes. It's a stunning painting based on an Old Testament story. Unlike Caravaggio's, this piece doesn't depict the act of beheading Holofernes. He isn't shown here, but in the shadows in the background, there is a servant holding a bag ready to receive the enemy's head. The next beautiful woman is his wife, Saskia, portrayed as a shepherdess or Flora. Painting I chose to copy with colorful pencils. And the final religious themed painting I saw at the exhibition was created almost a decade later in a distinctly Protestant style. It's the Holy Family with curtain. Here, he also used an element of trompe-l'œil. Standing before this painting, one of the first I saw at the exhibition, I nearly cried, because I wasn't yet prepared to witness so much beauty in one place. A year later came the work of Van Hoogstraten, who had just begun his independent career. He selected all the most remarkable features of his teacher's works. This is the quintessence of everything his master instilled in him. Few years later, he gains success and becomes an independent and pretty ambitious artist, constantly trying to outdo his contemporaries. As you already know, Van Hoogstraten developed the illusionistic techniques learned from Rembrandt, especially in optical illusions and so-called letter racks. In 1651, in Vienna, he presented 3 paintings of different genres to Emperor Ferdinand III. And the still life in particular impressed the emperor. He looked at the same for a long time, but found himself fooled and said, "This is the first painter to have fooled me," and then had him told that, as punishment for that deceit, he would not get that piece back, but that he wished to keep it forever and value it according to its worth. So, Van Hoogstraten had received as an honorary gift the golden chain and portrait medal from the emperor, and after that he used it as his trademark for the purpose of self-promotion. So this original still life became his brand identity, and even 10 years later he remained true to his model of success. This invention made him famous. Hoogstraten didn't limit himself to still life. He also applied his refined illusionistic technique in the skillful depiction of architecture. His illusionistic architectural perspectives are regarded as some of his most ingenious and inventive compositions. And the first of these is Inner Courtyard of the Vienna Hofburg, commissioned by Ferdinand III. By the way, my favorite Old Man at a Window was also created for the emperor. These 2 pieces now belong to Kunsthistorisches Museum. The next painting of architectural perspective was created 10 years later. It's the same impressive architectural composition, life-sized, incredibly detailed, with a threshold that creates the illusion that you could take a step forward toward the dog and the young man. Around the same time, he also painted Westminster Abbey, a smaller canvas but with no less detail. That was quite entertaining. It gave the impression that I had actually been inside. I was honestly struck and even took a selfie. Another very curious painting, roughly from the same period, depicts a domestic interior, a narrative of everyday life, with slippers left on the floor, keys. Most interestingly, he painted Terborch's The Gallant Conversation on the wall within the scene, once again showing his ambitious character and his desire to surpass his contemporaries. This painting represents the last decade of his life. It combines rich symbolism with theatrical staging and is the culmination of Van Hoogstraten's allegorical paintings. A naked woman holding scales and a mirror, that is, she stands equally for justice and truth. And there is the figure on the left. The mask, snake, and apple identify her as the personification of deceit. The complex narrative underscores Van Hoogstraten's conception of himself as a learned, skillful artist. In his late career, he moves further away from Rembrandt. It also can be seen in this late work, The Resurrection of Christ, which clearly differs from his teacher's style and technique. However, the expressive figures at the open coffin, illusionistically gleaming armor, Remember Jeremiah crying? These are the evidence of the lasting influence of Rembrandt's workshop. But let's return to the master, the last 20 years of his life. In this portrait, the light is concentrated on his face, and his body and clothing are rendered rather sketchily, which increases the intensity of the portrait. The next small self-portrait I like the most is the example of his certain technique. As in the previous portrait, a small number of colors and areas of high saturation and dense layers contrasted with unfinished, barely outlined brush strokes. Alongside them are smooth sculptural strokes that precisely follow the form of the plane. In some cases, he even uses his bare fingers. This variety of approaches creates an effect of inner radiance, the sense of depth and vitality. The stunning Juno, the Roman goddess of merit and wealth, with a peacock on the left. Rembrandt depicts Juno's shiny jewelry by applying a very thick layer of paint, whereas in other places the layer of paint is so thin that the canvas shows through. These two circles made this monumental self-portrait world famous. Around 60 years old Rembrandt, with palette, brushes, mahlstick, and painting rag. Rembrandt most likely uses the earth and the celestial globe to symbolize his being a universal artist. So, this interplay of roughly outlined and more precisely painted areas, which we can see in Rembrandt's latest, creates depth, and this effect Hoogstraten described in his research book Inlading. That is the introduction to the Academy of Painting, or the Visible World. And this is the self-portrait of 49 years old Hoogstraten at the peak of his career, 1 year before his death, and a tribute must be paid to his approach, his studies on optics, light, perspective, even his sonnets. He did lots of important things which are still discussed. His striking illusionistic paintings are still the object of admiration and with no doubt are among most famous of Dutch Golden Age. According to his pupil, Arnold Houbraken, he was always keen to compete with other artists and to outdo them. Driven by a particularly envious impulse, he set himself against other artists. There was no aspect of art in which others would seem to pull ahead, or he instantly followed at their heels. And whatever it happened to be, he was able to apply himself to it and master it. For me, when it comes to real art which can heal the soul, it's only Rembrandt. And he is probably the first and the only genius who can depict the whole story, even without mentioning important characters, the one who can depict true feelings, strong emotions, and whose characters are alive. Yet, to be completely honest, Hoogstraten is not that simple. Despite his ambition, pretentiousness, and perhaps even vanity, some of his works, especially the latest, can be mistaken for Rembrandt's. We can even compare, for example, these two portraits and two Holy Families. It's truly not easy to distinguish who is the author. Tobias' farewell to his parents. This one confused me. I was certain this painting is the work of Rembrandt. Yet, as it turned out, it was created by his pupil. And I honestly was so surprised. It's so powerful and touching. It's such a Rembrandt's drama. These two portraits have some similarities as well as different illusionistic means. Rembrandt focuses on clothing. Look at these colors and embroidery. I'm just in love with it. Accessories and the reduced usage of color. At the same time, the Hoogstraten's mean is a life-size portrait, the use of lighting, and the perspective. Look at the floor. This is the way he makes the Lord Knatchbull's presence very convincing. These both portraits are very realistic. And look at these two still lifes. They are the best examples that show the difference of Rembrandt's and Hoogstraten's illusionistic approaches. These are absolutely different, yet both convincing. And the most interesting, the resurrection of Christ. I specifically found an image of Rembrandt's work to compare it with the one we had seen by Hoogstraten. To be honest, at first I didn't like Hoogstraten's painting at all. Its composition, its colors and shades. That's why I decided to compare them, since Rembrandt has a painting on exactly the same subject. And we see that both paintings are quite different in composition. The color schemes are different. Rembrandt's colors are more muted, cooler, with very soft transitions. He has a brilliant sense of tone. Hoogstraten's palette is warmer, and I must say, now I truly like this work. It contains more of his personal style. The composition and perspective are bolder and quite daring. Expressive figures in shadow gripped by fear can be seen in both Rembrandt and Hoogstraten's works. Rembrandt's angel is depicted more tenderly, whereas Hoogstraten's is very expressive. And what pleases me, as I've mentioned before, is the gleaming weaponry. This is what Hoogstraten inherited from his teacher. The way Hoogstraten depicts the empty tomb is fascinating. I would say these works complement each other. Rembrandt's is incredibly beautiful and gentle, and expressive at the same time. So much movement, panic among the people plunged in shadow. We see this in Hoogstraten as well. Yet Hoogstraten emphasizes it with more contrast. There is more light and warmer tones and colors. Even though Hoogstraten in his later works diverged more from Rembrandt's style, we can still see distinct traces and accents that clearly echo Rembrandt. And we also see that he carried over everything best from Rembrandt into a more expressive, personal form. And here lies the mystery. Is Hoogstraten truly as deep as Rembrandt, but who was forced to adapt to the interests and demands of his patrons? Or was it more of an automatic habit to paint like his teacher, the first and only one, whose workshop he joined at the age of 13? Be that as it may, Hoogstraten achieved his fame and wealth through his own path, inventing new approaches and creating astonishingly detailed images, highly appreciated by nobility. Yet, as we can see, he carried Rembrandt's depth with him throughout his life. The art of untold. This subtle incompleteness, so often found in Rembrandt's works, is the finest artistic device, stirring emotions, igniting the imagination, and deepening the drama. In it lies the essence of true art, not only in composition, but in technique, colors, figures. With this incompleteness, Rembrandt tells more than Hoogstraten in his most famous paintings, with his craving to depict everything in details, to demonstrate all of his talents. On the contrary, Rembrandt's works are alive not because he depicts every tiny detail, but because he captures what truly matters. For me, Hoogstraten's works that were so popular among nobility is more entertaining. It's more about refined technique rather than real high art, which enriches the spirit and awakens imagination. Rembrandt, with his masterpieces, makes you a co-author. Maybe he knew that the perfection, the most beautiful things are those unseen and untold. And he was able to create that context to see beyond his paintings. Our imagination and feelings complete the image and bring it to life. Rembrandt's spirit influenced Hoogstraten and other masters, and his legacy keeps influencing art. His masterpieces can touch our heart and stay there forever. His works speak to us, and this dialogue can turn into one of the most wonderful creations.